This one, Streetcars to Columbia Heights. And this is a case of, we'll look at the Columbia Heights line and then also at the Minneapolis Filtration Plant Railway. And also a little something on Lowry's, on the Lincoln funeral car. So anyway, we're down at the corner of, I want to say, Washington and 2nd Avenue South. This is the Metropolitan Building, the Twin Cities answer to the loss of Penn Station when this went down. And so the Central Avenue line was through routed with the Bloomington line. And it had kind of a weird route through downtown. It went in front of what is now the US Bank Stadium on Chicago Avenue and then up 4th Street to 2nd Avenue South past City Hall. But it never really got into the center of downtown. And so if you wanted to transfer to it, it was usually at least a 2 or 3 or 4 block walk from whatever you were transferring from. Sort of a strange routing. And here we're at the corner of 3rd Street, and we're looking north. You can see the post office there and the fireproof Minnesotan Hotel on Washington Avenue. And so it went down the to the end of 2nd Avenue South by the main post office and turned and jogged over a block to 3rd Avenue South to take the 3rd Avenue Bridge.
It's such a deserted photo.
Deserted meaning nobody there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. Maybe it's Sunday morning or something. Who knows? Not sure where this one came from. So here's the 3rd Avenue Bridge. This one was kind of interesting because that bridge had concrete poles to support the span wire. There were a number of concrete poles around, but they weren't very common. And then, of course, it also had street lights on it. And here's an earlier view, and this is the Exposition Center. This thing hosted the Republican National Convention sometime, I think, in the 1890s or so. And then it was torn down and replaced by a Coca-Cola bottling plant, of all things. And then now there's condos here. View from the other end of the bridge. And here you can see the railroad tracks that still ran along Main Street. This was a vestige, I think, of the original St. Paul and Pacific line in 1862. I think this is where it ended. And so now we're up on the Exposition Center, and this is the corner of 2nd Street Southeast. Here's University Avenue Southeast. I'm sorry, this is University Avenue, and this is 4th Street Southeast. And this is the Aveda building today. It was at the time the old S&L department store. This over here is the Labor Temple. Not much in here that's still around other than this, and I think one of these buildings up here. Here we are next to the S&L department store. You can see the Central line crossing the Como Harriet. And this, of course, is the intersection of 7th Street and Central. This is where the Monroe line took off to the left. And it's hard to realize that all these streets were brick. And yet the center area where the tracks were was concrete. But this is just south of Broadway, looking up to the intersection, the Broadway and Central, that was elevated over the railroad tracks. And this is an earlier view when that bridge was made of wood. So this would be Broadway looking at Central. And here we are up on top of this. This building is still here, but this was the Land and Nod Mattress Factory. And now it's full of artists and got a coffee shop in it and has offices. Now we're looking down north from Broadway. Here you can see the Northern Pacific crossing in the distance, so about 17th Avenue. Oh, I'll come back here. And then this sequence shows the underpass when they went and grade separated this. And let's see, do I have a view? So yeah, so we have a sequence during the construction where this is where the bridge was going to be. So they had to construct a shoe fly around it for both the railroad and another shoe fly around it for the streetcar. And here you can see that they've installed diamonds where the tracks used to be at ground level. So they went through kind of an iterative process to make this happen. Now we're up just south of Lowry Avenue. This is an Ed Nelson photo where he was running the PCC car and he took a photo out the front. And I think somebody said that this was a Hasty Tasty or something like that. Northwestern National Bank is still up there, as well as Fargo. And the Orion Theater. Most of these buildings are still there. Here's the corner of Lowry. And this drugstore, Rod, do you remember this was B Sharp Music for a long time?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then it burned down. So right now there's a vacant lot here on the corner. And this, of course, is an older photo from the early 1890s, but it shows the car passing showroom shops of the Soo Line Railroad. And so now we're north, just north of where the Soo Line crossed at about 36th Avenue. And this shows the track of the Filtration Plant Railroad, which crossed, and then it was a third track within the street. And the streetcar, as they often did, narrowed down to a single track to cross the Soo Line Railroad, because the streetcar company, as the second occupant of that crossing, had to maintain it. And so it was always cheaper to maintain one track rather than two.
Kind of exceptionally pretty track work right there.
Isn't that nice? Yeah. Jim Kreuzberger took this. He took a number of these track views and he had a good camera. So here's an early advertisement for Columbia Heights because Lowry developed much of Columbia Heights. And here we are at the corner of 37th and Central. And this was in 1953. This was after the extension into Columbia Heights was abandoned back to the city limits in 37th. And so in the foreground is the track for the Filtration Plant Railway. And then this streetcar has reached the end of the line. You can see the city limits sign and just discharged all its passengers. And it's going to pull forward and Y out in 37th Avenue, and these folks are going to get on a bus. And that's what's happening here. The streetcar is Ying out. Here you can see the bus waiting and the people waiting to get on it. Now we're up at the corner of 40th and Central. The line came up 40th and turned on to Central. I have personal remembrances of this drugstore, because I went to Columbia Heights Junior High, which was located a block away from here, and this was still a drugstore then. This is where I would go over and buy comic books. Here's a streetcar turning the same corner. And here's the same corner looking the other way. And up at the other, about halfway up the block, was the Ben Franklin store, where you buy little balsa wood gliders and squirt guns and that kind of stuff. We're about a block or two west on 40th. This church is still there, though it looks different today. And this is a couple blocks further west. I believe this is the corner of Jefferson. There's a little incline up here. Whoops. Well, and this is, my goodness, this is the same location, just a little bit further west. So the streetcars turned around at the corner of 40th Avenue and 5th Street. And until I did the presentation of this show to Columbia Heights, they asked me to do this, I didn't realize that this was the Columbia Heights Hotel. And this was apparently, I think, owned by Lowry. And so it was a handy place for the motorman to go in and use the bathroom if he needed one. So here you're standing in front of the hotel, and it's 1950 whenever, and they're pulling up the line. This is, I think, Crane Car 82, which was used for this sort of stuff a lot. And so now we're back at 37th and Central, and you see the Columbia Heights streetcar meeting the Filtration Plant Railway. And the railway was built It's about 1.8 miles long, if I recall. Ran up the hill to the Hilltop Reservoir, which was owned by the city of Minneapolis, even though it was in Columbia Heights. That was a particularly high piece of ground. And it's still in use, still filters the water for Minneapolis. Anyway, they needed a way to get freight cars up there. And so they built this little electric line. They actually had Twin City Lines build it for them. And it says that then they hired Twin City Lines to run it. But I think at some point that simply stopped being the case later on, and they ran it themselves. It had one motorman from the time it started to within a year of when it was abandoned, and he became kind of a local celebrity. And so initially they did not carry passengers, but eventually there was demand, and so they decided to run, I don't know, something like 6 trips a day or so. Plus they'd go and run 1 or 2 freight trips. So here it is down at the corner. You can see somebody, she's either come down here to shop at the grocery store or she's transferred off a streetcar. There were no transfer privileges. It was a 3-cent fare. Here's the Hilltop Golf Links. And when you get the latest issue of Twin City Lines, I found a little news item where during the war, because of gas rationing, they asked the city to run an additional weekend run on this thing so you could get up to the golf course that was located up by the reservoir. I don't know if it ever happened. So here's the schedule. And this would actually be, weekdays would be weekday through Saturday. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah. So 8 trips on a weekday and 6 trips on a Sunday.
So that motorman worked less than we do on a Saturday shift.
Right. And this is him. This is him. This is Myron Handy, is the motorman. And I ran a little thing in Twin City Lines where twice a day, in the morning and in the afternoon, he'd stop into the grocery store at 37th Central and get a Coke. So the car was built by McGuire Cummings in Chicago, and it was designed to haul freight cars and passengers.
Look at all the ceiling lights they had in that car.
Yeah, quite a few.
Really, about 3 times more than we have.
And these had walkover seats that could flip back and forth.
Funny that it would have been so well lit since it was mostly a daytime thing.
Well, you know, it was kind of a stock design that came out from the factory. So I guess
Sure.
it came with the lights. So it ran mostly side of the road along Reservoir Boulevard. The grade was up to about 5%. Reservoir Boulevard was brick too. Newspaper photos. And not sure what the deal is with the little girl, but here it is approaching the plant. This spur at right was a little stub spur that went to the car barn, and the other went to the plant itself. And it ran all alongside the reservoir. And there's Myron. These are some newspaper photos. They came up and documented it. Here you see they're changing ends, and this must be the end of the shift. So they're going to take the guys back down to catch the streetcar back to town. And forget what this is. I think we'll see another shot where we can actually read what that is.
Those are chlorine containers.
Chlorine, yep, you can see it on here. So he's easing it down the hill. And so then they'd run in Central Avenue, and of course their track was over here where this car is, so they would have to run against traffic if they were coming downhill for about a block. And he's turning onto the Sioux Line right-of-way. Here you can see the tracks narrowing, and you can see the anti-dewirement grid above. And same thing, they had a little spur track, and then the Sioux would come and pick it up. And of course, there was the one famous incident where Myron had left the thing with the brakes on. Somehow the brakes bled off or something, and it ran through the switch, and ran all the way down the hill and wound up in Shoreham Yard. And this is the Soo Line switcher delivering it back. Nobody was injured. It wasn't damaged, but it made the newspapers. And of course, it attracted a bunch of management. Well, it just keeps flipping on me. So anyway, the other thing to talk about is the Lincoln funeral car, which Thomas Lowry, his idol was Abraham Lincoln. Lowry was from Illinois. Lincoln actually served as Lowry's father's lawyer. And so there was a personal connection. The other personal connection was that apparently Lowry's brother was killed in the Civil War. And it happened, well, I guess that's a further connection. And so the car was sold to the Union Pacific Railroad, used as a business car, later dropped down to maintenance away service because it was in the 1890s because it was obsolete by then. And it got sold to a couple of private parties that took it to things like the big exposition in St. Louis where it was displayed. But it wasn't in real good shape. And Lowry was able to acquire it in, I want to say, 1905. And this is a 1905 photo taken at the 31st Street shops. And although the purpose, this is a rare shot of the double-decker for Lake Minnetonka. Here you can see the car in the background. And he assigned his son, Horace Lowry, who later became the company president, to get this thing restored. And they did a restoration kind of like we do a restoration. He had to shop all around the country for parts, but he got it done and put it up on property he owned in Columbia Heights, or just very south of Columbia Heights, overlooking Columbia Park. And it became it became something like a pilgrimage for Civil War veterans. The Grand Army or the Republic would meet in town, would take the streetcars up and visit Lowry's funeral car. And so we have in the collection a brochure that they put out about visiting it. And here it shows it as it was originally built. Later on, there were only 2 trucks under it. And this thing told how you could go and board at the West Hotel and take the Central Avenue line up. Although weirdly on this, they don't actually show where it was. It would have been right about here. And this is the view. It says taken from where the car now rests. And so this is along Columbia Parkway, technically in Minneapolis. And you're looking out over the Soo Line going down. This pedestrian bridge is still there. But of course, in 1911, a prairie fire came along and it burned the thing to the ground. And some people retrieved pieces of wood from it. According to a newspaper story, one guy turned his piece of wood into a violin. But gone, gone, gone. And that's the end of this show.